When you face difficulties in life, the first instinct for many people is to share them openly, almost as if speaking them aloud will lighten the weight. But there's something important to understand. The world is not obligated to care about your struggles. Every individual you encounter has their own load to bear, often heavier than what they let on. When you make your problems the centerpiece of your conversations, you risk not only pushing people away, but also undermining your own strength. It's not that others are cruel or heartless. It's simply that existence is demanding for everyone, and their energy is limited. They cannot possibly carry both their burden and yours without consequence. The truth is, life requires you to carry the heaviest parts of your suffering alone, because that is where responsibility, growth, and dignity are forged. Think about the people you admire most. They're rarely the ones who endlessly complain about how unfair life is. Instead, they are often the people who take hardships with a certain quiet discipline. When you see someone endure difficulty without constantly broadcasting it, you respect them more deeply. Why? Because there's a strength in silence, a discipline in facing adversity directly rather than using it as currency for sympathy. It's easy to tell people your struggles. It's harder and far more impressive to demonstrate resilience through your actions. The first path brings pity at best, but the second earns respect and trust. When you constantly share your problems, what you're really doing is offloading your emotional responsibility onto others. You're saying, "Take some of this weight from me," but that doesn't actually solve anything. It only delays the moment when you must confront your difficulties head on. Worse, it often makes the other person feel drained or resentful, even if they don't say it outright. People are naturally drawn to those who inspire them, who stand as examples of courage. If your presence consistently radiates despair and helplessness, people won't want to be around you, no matter how much they might sympathize with your condition in the beginning. Over time, sympathy turns into avoidance. This doesn't mean you should never talk about your struggles. There is value in carefully choosing moments and people with whom to share, but you should never expect others to automatically shoulder your pain just because you feel it intensely. Pain is universal, but the responsibility for overcoming it is deeply personal. When you realize that no one is bound to care about your suffering, you are forced to look inward and cultivate the kind of character that doesn't depend on external validation. That realization, though harsh, is liberating. It removes the illusion that someone else will save you, and it compels you to become the kind of person who can stand upright despite the chaos of life. Ultimately, the weight you carry is what shapes you. If you attempt to hand it off at every opportunity, you rob yourself of the chance to grow stronger. People aren't obligated to care about your struggles, and once you accept that truth, you gain the freedom to face your problems not as curses to be broadcast, but as challenges to be conquered. That is where real respect begins, not in telling people your problems, but in showing them your capacity to endure and rise above them. When you talk endlessly about your problems, you risk cementing them into your identity. Complaining may feel like release in the moment, but it operates like a cycle. You speak of your hardships, others give you sympathy, and for a brief instant you feel relief. But what happens after that? The problem doesn't disappear. Instead, it grows stronger because you've given it more attention, more space in your mind, and more power over your narrative. Each time you repeat the story of your struggle, you carve it deeper into the structure of who you are, until it begins to define you. You no longer see yourself as someone facing a temporary difficulty. You start to see yourself as a victim of life, as someone destined to suffer. And once that identity takes hold, it becomes nearly impossible to move forward, because you've convinced yourself that your problems are what make you who you are. The danger of constant complaining is that it blinds you to solutions. When you spend your energy retelling your difficulties, you're not using that energy to act. Talking about problems can create the illusion of progress, as though acknowledging them is the same as addressing them. But in truth, it's a trap. The more you complain, the less you act. Over time, you become comfortable in the role of the victim because that role provides an excuse. If life is unfair, if people don't treat you right, if the world is against you, then you don't have to take responsibility for changing anything. Complaining becomes a shield that protects you from the discomfort of growth, but it also keeps you imprisoned in mediocrity. Consider the people who are perpetually negative, always finding a reason to explain why nothing works out for them. At first, they may attract compassion, but gradually they repel it. Their constant complaints weigh on others, turning every interaction into a drain. People eventually stop listening, not because they don't care, but because endless complaining without action becomes noise. What began as a plea for empathy transforms into a habit of self-sabotage. The complainer doesn't even realize how much power, they're surrendering power, that could have been used to make changes in their life. There's also a deeper psychological cost. Complaining doesn't just reinforce the idea of being a victim to others, it reinforces it within yourself. Every time you complain, you're reminding your own mind that you're powerless. The brain adapts to repetition, and if the repetition is negativity, helplessness, or blame, then those patterns solidify. You start to see the world through a distorted lens where everything feels heavier, darker, and more hostile. Soon it isn't just your words that are negative. It's your thoughts, your emotions, your very outlook on existence. The way out of this trap is to recognize that silence and action are infinitely more powerful than words of complaint. By refusing to let your problems dominate your conversations, you starve them of attention. Instead, you redirect your focus to action, to responsibility, to solutions. That shift doesn't just alter how others see you, it alters how you see yourself. You move from victimhood toward agency, from helplessness toward strength. Complaining reinforces victimhood, but refusing to complain is the first step toward reclaiming your authority over life. Strength comes from carrying your own load. And this is a truth that most people resist because it feels overwhelming. Yet, paradoxically, it is the very act of shouldering your burden that transforms you into someone capable of withstanding life's chaos. When you rely on others to consistently take the weight off your shoulders, you remain weak, dependent, and resentful when they inevitably fail to meet your expectations. But when you accept that no one can live your life for you, no one can fight your battles in your place, and no one can endure your suffering on your behalf, then you step into the role of a responsible individual. That responsibility is not merely a duty, it is the gateway to dignity, to competence, and to strength. Carrying your own load doesn't mean you deny that life is difficult. It means you acknowledge its difficulty and still decide to stand upright under it. People admire those who can confront hardship directly, because it reveals something essential about human potential. When someone watches you deal with adversity with courage, they don't just respect you. They're reminded of their own capacity to rise. It's contagious, but the opposite is also true. When people see you collapse under every difficulty and demand constant rescue, they begin to lose faith not only in you, but in themselves. Your example either strengthens the world around you or weakens it. That's the responsibility you carry whether you admit it or not. There is a profound difference between asking for help when it's truly necessary and depending on others to carry the weight of your existence. One builds relationships based on mutual respect, while the other erodes them into dependency and resentment. People want to help someone who is already trying to help themselves. They don't want to drag along someone who refuses to take even the smallest step. When you carry your own load, you signal to others that you are serious, disciplined, and committed to growth. That draws allies toward you. But when you refuse to bear your burden, you find yourself increasingly alone, because no one wants to endlessly prop up someone unwilling to stand. What many people overlook is that the weight of life is not just something to endure, it's something that sculpts you. Every responsibility you accept, every difficulty you face, every challenge you endure, it all shapes your character into something stronger, sharper, and more resilient. If you hand that weight to others, you rob yourself of the transformation. Imagine a muscle that is never used. It atrophies, weakens, and eventually fails. The human spirit works the same way. If you avoid carrying your own load, you never develop the resilience that life inevitably demands. And when the real storms arrive, as they always do, you will have nothing inside you to withstand them. Strength comes from the decision to take responsibility when it would be easier to complain. It comes from embracing the weight of life rather than wishing it away. It is not comfort that creates admirable people, but discipline and struggle. When you learn to carry your own load, you not only survive, you rise above, and in doing so, you inspire others to do the same. You should not share your problems with everyone, because not everyone is capable of handling them, nor should they be. The people you open up to shape how you deal with your struggles, and if you are careless about whom you confide in, you may actually make things worse. There is a difference between seeking wisdom and merely seeking attention. When you tell everyone your troubles, what you often receive in return is not help but gossip, pity, or even quiet judgment. Many people do not know what to do with your pain, and so they either dismiss it, use it against you, or spread it around for their own amusement. This is why choosing carefully who you share with is an act of maturity and self-respect. Imagine walking into a crowded room and announcing your deepest struggle. What happens? Some may feign sympathy, but they will forget your words as soon as they leave. Others might see it as a weakness to exploit. Only a rare few will genuinely understand and offer meaningful support. So why scatter your vulnerability like seeds on rocky ground? Vulnerability must be handled with precision. It is not a performance, it is an intimate exchange that requires trust. When you tell the wrong people your problems, you place a sacred part of yourself into careless hands. That doesn't just fail to solve the problem, it creates new wounds. At the same time, bottling everything inside is not the answer either. Silence without strategy can become poison, building pressure until it bursts out in destructive ways. The balance lies in discerning who deserves access to your inner world. The right person to share with is someone who has demonstrated wisdom, loyalty, and the ability to listen without turning the conversation back to themselves. This might be a close friend, a mentor, or even a professional guide. The point is not to never speak of your problems, but to understand that your problems are valuable, and handing them to the wrong person diminishes their significance. There is also another dimension here. The act of selective sharing forces you to think about the purpose of speaking. If you're about to tell someone your problem, ask yourself, am I doing this to seek a real solution, or am I simply asking for validation? Am I using this conversation as a crutch or as a step toward growth? When you frame it this way, you begin to treat your struggles as opportunities to be refined rather than excuses to be pitied. The truth is, most of the world is indifferent to your pain, not out of malice, but because everyone is carrying something heavy. That reality makes it even more crucial to guard your struggles wisely. Share them with people who can actually guide you, people whose advice comes from strength, not from their own unresolved bitterness. If you make the mistake of confiding in the wrong people, you don't just stay stuck. You risk becoming weaker because you've surrendered control of your story. But if you choose carefully, your vulnerability can be transformed into clarity, guidance, and ultimately, strength. Your energy is the atmosphere you carry with you, and whether you realize it or not. It shapes how others see you and how you see yourself. If you make negativity the foundation of your interactions, you will be remembered as the person who drains the room rather than the one who elevates it. Every complaint, every story of failure repeated without effort to change, every bitter word about how unfair life is, these things slowly form an image of you in the minds of others. People begin to associate your presence with heaviness, with gloom, with problems that never end. And the tragedy is that this reputation is not just external. It feeds back into your own self-image. You start to believe that you are the kind of person who is always struggling, always unlucky, always a victim. Energy is contagious. Think about how you feel when you are around someone who radiates optimism, determination, and calmness. You find yourself uplifted, inspired, even more willing to push through your own difficulties. Now think of someone who is perpetually negative, always talking about their problems, always emphasizing what's wrong. Their presence weighs you down. You might feel sympathy at first, but over time you begin to avoid them. This is not cruelty. It is human instinct. People want to be around those who strengthen them, not those who consume their strength. When your energy is defined by negativity, you will inevitably drive people away, even the ones who care about you most. The deeper danger is that constant negativity doesn't just affect how others perceive you, it corrodes your own identity. Your brain listens to the stories you tell. If the story is always about misfortune and struggle, then your mind accepts that as truth and molds your emotions and behaviors to fit it. You become trapped in a loop where every problem seems bigger, every obstacle seems insurmountable, because you've trained yourself to focus on the negative. Over time, it becomes nearly impossible to imagine a different reality, because you've fused your sense of self with suffering. This is why protecting your energy is not about pretending everything is fine or forcing false positivity. It's about recognizing that what you emphasize grows. If you emphasize misery, misery expands. If you emphasize resilience, resilience expands. The choice is not about denying your problems, but about deciding whether to make them your identity. When you tell people your problems constantly, you give them more power over your life narrative. When you discipline yourself to face your problems quietly and act towards solutions, you project strength, not only to the world, but to yourself. Your energy is the currency of your relationships and the foundation of your self-image. If you want to be respected, trusted, and remembered as someone of value, you must guard it carefully. Let your energy speak of responsibility, determination, and hope. In doing so, you reshape how people perceive you, and more importantly, how you perceive yourself. That shift is not cosmetic. It is transformative, and it determines whether you live as a victim of your story or as its author. Pain is an unavoidable part of life, but what you do with it determines whether it destroys you or refines you. Many people respond to suffering by speaking about it endlessly, as if the mere act of telling others will somehow reduce its weight. But the truth is, repeating your problems does not make them disappear. It only makes them more real, more entrenched in your identity. The alternative is to take that pain and transform it into action. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you ask, "What can I do with this? How can this suffering be turned into fuel for growth?" That shift changes everything because it moves you from passive victim to active creator. Every struggle holds within it the possibility of transformation. History, literature, and everyday life are full of examples of people who endured unimaginable hardship, and yet emerged stronger, wiser, and more capable because they refused to waste their suffering on complaints. They didn't see pain as a dead end, they saw it as raw material. Pain can become the very thing that sharpens your willpower. deepens your understanding and compels you to build something meaningful. But for that to happen, you must stop treating your suffering as a conversation piece and start treating it as an opportunity. Transforming pain into action requires discipline because the easy path is always to talk rather than to act. Complaining gives you a brief sense of relief, but it steals your long-term strength. Action, on the other hand, feels heavy at first, but it creates genuine change. When you turn your energy toward doing rather than telling, you begin to see progress, even if it is small. That progress reinforces the belief that you are not powerless. Each small act of responsibility becomes a brick laid in the foundation of a stronger version of yourself. This transformation also alters how others perceive you. People are drawn to those who take suffering and convert it into something admirable. When they see you endure difficulty and channel it into purpose, they respect you. They may even be inspired by you because your example proves that hardship doesn't have to end in defeat. On the other hand, when you only talk about your pain, you offer nothing but despair. And despair repels rather than attracts. By turning pain into action, you not only improve your own life, you contribute strength to the lives of those around you. Your health and your dreams matter too. It is a signal, a force, and a potential. It's asking you to grow, to change, to become someone you were not before. When you stop telling people your problems and instead build something with them, whether it's resilience, discipline, or purpose, you transform suffering from a burden into a catalyst. The weight doesn't vanish, but you carry it differently. It becomes part of your strength rather than part of your weakness. That is the true power of pain, not in how loudly you speak of it, but in how powerfully you act because of it.